All right, here we go with section 5. Here's your focus question. Domestic and international troubles in the 1970s made Americans anxious and emboldened conservatives. Economic crisis made lower taxes, less government regulation, and social spending cuts to spur business investment seem appealing. Fears about declining U.S. world power led to calls for renewing the Cold War. The civil rights and sexual revolutions produced fears and resentments that eroded the Democratic coalition, and rising urban crime created calls for law and order. In the 1970s, conservatives abandoned overt opposition to black struggle for racial justice as the confrontations of George Wallace were replaced by demands for local control and resistance to the federal government. The language of individual freedom appealed especially to growing numbers of mostly white suburbanites leaving the cities and urban problems. The suburbs became the base of modern conservatism. But conservatives also organized at the grassroots level and organized to win local elections and take local government, even school boards. One set of conservatives, the neoconservatives, turned against the federal government and liberalism, citing the decline in moral standards and respect for authority. They wanted to end welfare, decrease taxes and regulations, and return to fighting the Cold War. The rise of religious fundamentalism in the 1970s expanded conservatism's base. More and more Americans embraced traditional religious values. While membership in mainstream Protestant denominations declined, evangelical churches flourished. Evangelical Christians were alienated from a culture that seemed to discount religion and promote immorality. They demanded the reversal of Supreme Court decisions that banned prayer in public schools, protected pornography as free speech, and legalized abortion. In 1979, Jerry Falwell, a Virginia minister, created a group, the Moral Majority, to wage war against sin and elect pro-life, pro-family, pro-American candidates. Falwell labeled supporters of abortion rights, easy divorce, and reduced defense budgets agents of Satan trying to undermine God's plans for America. But Christian conservatives seemed most angered by the sexual revolution, which they saw as an immoral threat to traditional families. They thought the 1960s had turned freedom into moral anarchy. Singer Anita Bryant passed an anti-gay ordinance under the banner Save Our Children. In the 1970s, family values became central to conservative politics, most prominently in the fight over the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. First proposed in the 1920s, the ERA was revived by second-wave feminists. Its affirmation that equality of rights under the law could not be abridged on account of sex seemed uncontroversial, and Congress approved it in 1972 with little controversy and sent it to the states for ratification. But it sparked protest from those who believed it would discredit the role of wife and homemaker. The ERA revealed divisions among women as well. To its supporters, the ERA guaranteed women's freedom in the public sphere. To its opponents, freedom for women was in their roles as wife and mother. Opponents claimed that the amendment would erode male breadwinner support for wives. Though polls showed that most male and female Americans supported the ERA, it did not achieve the required ratification of 38 states in order to become law. Far more bitter was the battle over abortion rights, which was another example to conservatives of how liberals in office were spreading sexual immorality at the cost of moral values. A movement to reverse Roe v. Wade started among Roman Catholics, but soon included evangelical Protestants and social conservatives. The movement insisted that life began at conception and that abortion was murder. Feminists argued that a woman's right to control her own body includes the right to safe, legal abortions. Both sides showed how the rights revolution had reshaped political language, as opponents of abortion appealed for the right to life, while supporters celebrated the right to choose. The anti-abortion movement successfully pressured Congress over President Ford's veto to end federal funding for abortions for poor women in the Medicaid program, and by the 1990s, some extreme anti-abortion activists were bombing medical clinics and assassinating doctors who terminated pregnancies. Today, that Roe versus Wade has been overturned, and abortion rights are on a state-by-state basis, making it difficult in many areas for the procedure to be obtained as providers stopped offering it. The West has always both reflected and contributed to national trends, and beginning in the 1970s, it was a fertile ground for strands of conservatism. Many transplants to California brought their evangelical Christianity and their growing disdain for the rights revolution. They embraced an anti-tax model for the Republican Party led by Californians such as Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. In 1978, conservatives ran a successful campaign to ban further increases in property taxes, known as Proposition 13, and demonstrated the power of anti-tax politics. The new law benefited businesses and homeowners, but also cut funds for schools, libraries, and other public services. Anti-tax sentiment flourished throughout the nation, and other states passed similar laws. New environmental regulations sparked calls for less government regulation of the economy, especially in the West, where the Sagebrush Rebellion sought to reduce federal bureaucracy's control over and conservation of the region's land and its resources. The roots of this rebellion lie as far back as the 1920s, when the U.S. Forest Service announced plans to increase grazing fees and mineral rights in national forests and other public lands. Westerners who believed environmental regulations were closing the public domain to resource extraction eagerly supported Reagan's campaign. Using the language of freedom from government tyranny, leaders in Western states embraced states' rights. While the Sagebrush Rebellion had few concrete accomplishments, it underscored the rising tide of anti-government sentiment. By 1980, Carter was deeply unpopular. Conservatism seemed on the rise everywhere. In England, Margaret Thatcher became prime minister, promising to sell state-owned industries to private firms, shrink the welfare state, and reduce taxes and the power of unions. In the United States, Ronald Reagan's campaign for the presidency united conservatives around promises to end stagflation and restore America's confidence in its role in the world. Reagan also appealed to white backlash against civil rights, voicing support for states' rights, vilifying welfare recipients, and condemning busing and affirmative action. Although not devout and a divorcee, Reagan won the support of family values religious conservatives. Reagan won the election, taking former Democratic bastions such as Illinois, Texas, and New York, while Carter received only 41% of the popular vote. While Carter went on to lead anti-poverty, human rights, and diplomatic efforts around the world, his presidency is considered by most to be a failure, and his defeat launched the Reagan Revolution, which made freedom the domain of the right in American politics. So that's the end of Section 5. We'll be back for Section 6.